More than 100 days have passed since the South Korea-Japan conflict was triggered by Tokyo's trade curbs on July 4th. Since the start of the rift, Japan has placed export curbs on top of taking out South Korea from its list of trusted trading partners. Seoul lodged a WTO complaint over Japan's trade curbs on September 11th. Amid the heightening tensions between the two countries, South Korean Prime Minister Nak-yon is set to attend the enthronement ceremony of Japanese Emperor Naruhito on October 22nd, potentially opening the door for the two sides to start engaging in dialogue. The trip of the Prime Minister, who has deep understanding and ties with Japan, indicates South Korea's gesture of wanting to seek a resolution to the frayed bilateral relations. Prime Minister Lee is set to attend the enthronement ceremony on October 22nd and meet Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe the following day. It will go down as the first high-level meeting between Seoul and Tokyo since South Korea's Supreme Court ruling on forced labor issue in October should Lee and Abe meet in Japan. It is to be seen whether the two countries could use this opportunity to untie the tattered relationship.
Hello, welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Daniel Che. Seoul-Tokyo trade dispute has been ongoing for over 100 days now, and so far, no high-level talks. But that's about to change with Emperor Naruhito's enthronement ceremony bringing together the prime ministers of both sides. Will this help lay the groundwork for the two countries to try and turn things around? We'll turn to a number of experts from inside and outside of the nation to try and answer this question and much more. So, let's get to the point. And to help us dissect today's topic into digestible bites, we're joined by Professor Song Se-ryun from Kyung University. Thank you so much for making time for us again.
Happy to be here. It's been a while.
It's been a while. October 22nd, that's when a very special event for Japan, the enthronement ceremony of their new emperor, Naruhito, will be held, and various dignitaries from around the world are invited. For South Korea, we're sending the Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think there's a subtle message in President Moon not going, but also a message in Prime Minister Lee going there. I mean, frankly, we're not getting along these days, so it would be a stretch to have the president go there. But Prime Minister Lee knows Japan, have a lot of friends there, and he's a high enough of a level of delegate to send there, to send the message that we are open to talks and we want to normalize our relationship. So I think that it's a little bit of a positive message.
Right. Certainly we're seeing some signs of efforts to mend frosty ties there. Nak-yon, the Prime Minister, is also known to have a lot of experience working in Japan, and he also has a close relationship with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe before they became big names.
Right. He spent some time in Japan as a reporter. Actually, he attended the last enthronement ceremony in Japan as the reporter to Japan. And he has been active as a parliamentarian. There's a union, a parliamentarian union between those legislators in both countries. And he has been active there in a leadership position. So we could say that he knows Japan and he knows favorably about the relationship between the Japan and Korea. So his message probably will be towards a better future.
And the Prime Minister isn't the only VIP visiting Japan for the event. Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister, Cho Se-young, will also be there, and this can be seen as greater efforts by South Korea to try and mend frayed ties. And of course, Minister Cho has rich knowledge and history of Japan as well.
Right, that bolsters a message that we want to normalize the situation. And also, I believe there is a director level or vice minister level talks between the Japan and Korea. So that kind of paves the way if there is to be a significant talks between the two countries, especially if the Prime Minister has a talk with Abe, a one-on-one in Japan. Probably that would be a very decisive message that we are paving some better ways than the kind of squabbling several months.
Certainly all welcome positive developments. Now let us extend our conversation to another expert that's joining us. It's time for our first Skype session. We have Stephen R. Nagy, professor from International Christian University in Japan, joining us to talk about how locals are reacting to the emperor's coronation. Hello there, Professor.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for making time for us. Could you first tell us how significant the enthronement ceremony is to the Japanese people?
The enthronement ceremony for Emperor Naruhito is extremely important for the unity of the Japanese people. The emperor is seen as the unifying representative of Japan. It's seen as a historical figure and a lineage that dates back 2,000 years. And I think in particular for this particular emperor, Emperor Naruhito is seen as someone that's wedded to pacifism, wedded to the Article 9 of the Constitution, and wedded to forming strong and peaceful and prosperous relations with South Korea, with China, and with all the countries in East Asia. So I think that his symbolism is important not only for Japan and Japanese people, but for the region at large.
South Korea's Prime Minister Nak-yon will attend the ceremony. He is known to have a very close relationship with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. What is Tokyo's reaction to his visit to the event?
Well, first and foremost, I think that our viewers understand that South Korea and Japan relations are not in a positive place right now. But I think the enthronement ceremony and the visit by Prime Minister Lee represents, an olive branch of sorts, in which that the South Koreans are really showing that this is an important event for Japan, and they would like it to go well, and they would like to show the respect to Japan and the imperial family. But at the same time, they would like to, open up the for opportunities for dialogue to bring the negative spiral of relations between South Korea and Japan back to where they should be, relations based on, both being liberal democratic societies, sharing many security concerns such as North Korea and, a growing China. And I think importantly that at the grassroots level, ordinary South Koreans and Japanese really share many of the same values in terms of prioritizing peace, priority, family. And I think that this is an important symbol. And I think that the gesture will be really taken by the Japanese and by the Japanese government for what it is, an olive branch to reset South Korea and Japan relations.
Stephen, what do you think the duo will likely focus on if they meet on the sidelines of the ceremony?
Well, first and foremost, whenever state leaders meet on the sidelines of any meeting, they talk about the importance of the relationship, the importance of moving towards positive dynamics and contributing to peace and security within the region. I think that they'll talk about their mutual concerns about the direction of North Korea and what is going to happen on the peninsula in terms of denuclearization and how they can cooperate to manage this. I think there's a possibility to talk about the GSOMA agreement and how it's an important agreement in terms of intelligence sharing. That it's a voluntary agreement of intelligence sharing. There's no demands for the South Koreans to share information with the Japanese and vice versa, but it's an important platform for cooperation. And we've seen that platform for cooperation being tested by the North Koreans with their recent missile tests, but also by the Chinese and the Russians with their flights over the Dokdo or Takeshima Islands, which are very important for both countries. So I think that those are particular areas that they should cooperate, and they'll probably mention behind the scenes. But I think also of how to reset relations, how can they move forward, how can they build trust. And I'll go back to my previous point. I think both countries have a lot to share. They have shared values and shared liberal democratic institutions, and they should be working much closer together than they are now.
All right. Thank you, Professor Nagy, for your time and your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you again for having me. It's always great to contribute to bringing a better understanding of South Korea and Japan relations in the region.
Thank you so much again. Now, coming back to you, Professor Song, what's your take on Japan's overall reaction to the coronation and, of course, South Korea's very welcome efforts to try and extend an olive branch?
I think they will be appreciative of this. I think that our relationship has kind of soured at this point now, but I don't think it was the overall plan of Japan to make it pan out this way. I think there was a little bit of a miscalculation when they excluded us in a whitelist and put their restrictions on those. Probably they wanted to send a message in response to our action in the High Court. Probably they didn't really expect that it would be prolonged like this, and probably this is a great chance or excuse to mend ways and work together for a solution. I agree with the sentiment that was expressed here, that this has to be an opportunity for two countries to change courses.
Right, a very traditional ceremony seems to be playing a very important political role at this point.
Right.
All right, let's shift our focus to Japan. Unlike the presidential system in South Korea, Japan has a monarch who ascends to the throne based on hereditary succession rules, that is. Let's find out more about Emperor Naruhito, who opened a new Reiwa era in Japan.
On October 22nd, Japan is holding an enthronement ceremony of Naruhito, who succeeded the throne as the 126th Emperor of Japan. Taking on the rulership based on hereditary succession rules, the Japanese emperor became the embodiment of all sovereign power, including in the areas of politics, military, and religion after the Meiji Restoration. But after Japan lost World War II, the emperor has been stripped of most of his power, with Japan turning into constitutional monarchy. Since then, the sovereignty was vested to the nation's prime minister and the cabinet. In the present day, the emperor does not carry any political power, but he is still respected by the Japanese people and has a significant influence in the nation. Born in 1960, Naruhito is the first and only post-war generation to have ascended to the throne. He is also the first Japanese monarch to study abroad at the University of Oxford in England. In 1993, he married Empress Masako, who was born a commoner and at the time a diplomat. Attention is focused on how Naruhito perceives the Korea-Japan relations amid the prolonging trade spat. Naruhito's father and predecessor Akihito, before his abdication, has apologized several times on Japan's past wrongdoings. Naruhito expressed he will continue to spread the message of pacifism. On August 15th, marking the 74th anniversary of the Korean Independence Day and the end of World War II in the Pacific region and Asia, Naruhito expressed deep remorse over Japan's wartime role. In the wake of the coronation of the emperor who symbolizes Japan and its people, it is to be seen whether Naruhito's role to build international trust between the countries could help Korea and Japan thaw the long-running conflict and create an atmosphere for reconciliation.
From what we know, Professor, Emperor Naruhito shares similar views with his father, his predecessor, on South Korea especially, and also about Japan's pacifist constitution, it seems.
Right. His father, we heard over the years that his father stressing the importance of peace. And I think it was an overall message for Japan as well, although he is not supposed to meddle in any kind of political matters, but in terms of diplomatic and those kind of hopeful messages, he has been pretty vocal about it. So if son follows his father's step, and there is ample evidence at this point is that he is following his father's message. So that's a hopeful sign that the relationship between Japan and Korea could be affected by the new message that new emperor sends. The new emperor but old message, which is a hopeful message at this point. So that's a little bit of a different message that Shinzo Abe has been sounding. So there's a cause of a little bit of optimism for both countries.
Would the new emperor's remarks about Korea have a degree of influence on Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's administration and their direction moving forward, especially pertaining to Korea?
Right. We suspect that Shinzo Abe wants that too. I think that he sent the pretty stern message to Korea, but I thought it, even at the time, was mostly for a domestic consumption in Japan. Remember, he was doing all those, measures to kind of send the message to Korea before the general election that they have. So there was even speculation that the things or the tone would change after the general election, but it didn't. So at this point, probably this would be a kind of one significant message, early opportunity to mend ways and go in a cooperative direction.
Right, and we, of course, expect something incredible to come out of the meeting between the two prime ministers since they do have a history. How do you anticipate the talks unfolding when they meet on the sidelines of the big coronation event in Japan?
Well, first of all, I think they will meet because of the official ceremonies. But the question at this point is whether there would be a kind of a prime minister to prime minister meeting probably the next day. If that happens, I think they're on the sideline a couple of things. One is, as I mentioned before, I think everybody wants a peaceful relationship between the two. The U.S. wants it. Korea, I think, it thinks it's desirable to go that way. Japan as well. So I think there is a ample kind of intentions all around to go that way. But the second, I think it's more important that since Japan has a new emperor, I think they have the intention to have a peaceful or very pleasurable message, I guess, to go forward for a while. They don't want any kind of bad things happen in the early days of new emperor's reign. So I think that there will be kind of a peaceful gesture will continue for a while. So that also adds to the atmosphere of olive branches, as you said.
Right, we have another expert joining us from outside of Korea, so let us connect to him right now. Let's find out how the rest of the world feels about the enthronement ceremony and the Seoul-Tokyo ties. We have Greg Andrew Brzezinski, Professor of History and International Affairs at the George Washington University, joining us via Skype. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Seoul's Prime Minister will attend the Japanese Emperor Naruhito's enthronement ceremony next week. Do you anticipate the visit to impact frayed bilateral ties?
Well, I think, first of all, it's good that the two sides are talking. Any discussion between the two can potentially have a positive impact. I have seen it moving very slowly in a positive direction during the last few weeks. I don't think that the current crisis in relations between South Korea and Japan is going to be resolved overnight, but I do think it's possible that if both sides continue to talk, they can at least move towards some sort of solution that's mutually acceptable.
What's the likely scenario when the two prime ministers sit down for talks on the sidelines of the ceremony, in your opinion?
Right. Well, I think obviously the main questions that they need to discuss and which they would hopefully discuss are, number one, trying to restore security ties between the two countries, and number two, trying to restore economic ties. I actually think that it's useful if they just talk along those lines for right now. I don't even know if they should start getting into the historical issues. I think those need to be resolved in the long term. I think, as I've said before, that Japan needs to go a long way in showing more contrition on these issues. But I think for right now, what's most important is that both countries try to do what's in their interests and try to at least find the areas where they can work together to promote their mutual interest. And again, I think one is obviously GSOMIA and intelligence sharing. I think that's one obvious point and something that should be discussed. And I think the economic, the economic, I don't know if you could call it sanctions, but the economic measures that South Korea and Japan have taken recently to punish each other is having a negative impact on both economies, on the tourism industry, on the airline industries. And I think it's important that the two try to work together on those issues.
Greg, amid the ongoing conflict, Seoul and Tokyo are set to hold high-level talks after next week's enthronement ceremony. Could the two sides find a breakthrough in these meetings? That's
a good question and a little bit of a challenging question. I I think I would be slightly surprised if they find a breakthrough in the talks that are going to be held after next week's enthronement ceremony. I do think that they can move toward a breakthrough during these talks, and I think that's very important for South Korea and Japan right now. So, I don't know if they'll resolve this problem. I don't know if they'll come up with a solution on the key issues next week. But I do think that they can talk and at least see where each side might be able and might be willing to make enough concessions to make the other side happy. I think that's really going to be the name of the game right now. Modest progress.
All right, Professor Brzezinski, thank you so much again for making time for us.
Thank you again for having me.
Anytime. Now, coming back here in the studio, Professor Song, do you share the sentiment with Greg that we should be able to see some positive baby steps towards progress?
I do, for the reasons we talked about so far. But also, I think that there is an interesting possibility that opens up because the former emperor, Akihito, he's not under bind of not talking about the political matters. If he can send the message, I think that would be tremendously helpful because he has been favorable to the Korea and the peace and all those package of messages probably would be very helpful, even though the new emperor might not be able to say much about what can be construed as interference with the political matters domestically. But his father is out of that bound at this point. So we can even think about those possibilities. I think that Shinzo Abe at this point has some things to work with if he really wants to normalize the situation. I mean, probably the prerequisite is to sound some sort of a contritious message. But that's not anything of a breakthrough. The official position of Japan was to be remorseful about the past histories, so it's not anything new. So he can go back to the official position of the Japanese government before, and the new emperor or the former emperor could help in making the atmosphere more peaceful. Probably the good things will happen.
Right. To dampen our very positive spirit at this point is the fact that Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has been going on this direction, I guess catering to the cause and needs of certain support base of his. So how would it be for him to try and make this drastic transition, whether it's because of certain factors like the need to go towards this direction, also possibly from the input of the emperor? Right,
that's a good question, but I would think that what overrides Shinzo Abe's direction is what the emperor says or the former emperor says. So in that leadership, probably Shinzo Abe can kind of dampen his messages down if the new emperor or the former emperor kind of stresses the peaceful message. He can just, meekly kind of defer to in Japan what is considered to be a higher power.
Right, and of course in Japan, they observe and respect history and tradition so much, and that could be a very likely scenario. Now, there's a series of bilateral talks lined up between the two sides. After the coronation, President Moon will meet with Japanese ambassador to Korea, and then we have Seoul's National Assembly Speaker attending the G20 parliamentary meeting in Japan. So could these sessions further cement the positive tone that's been set already with this upcoming meeting between the two prime ministers?
Now, assuming that this coronation lands an opportunity to go into a little bit more details, I think I agree that the specific matters of security measures and economic measures that both countries might get a big benefit out of, probably those, kind of focusing on those measures that has been kind of disrupted in recent months, probably it's a pretty easy measure to go back to where we were, as long as there is a spirit of cooperation and also sending messages, symbolic to say that both countries want to go in a new direction.
Right, it can't rain all the time. We are expecting something positive to slowly blossom from here on. Professor Song Se-ryun, it looks like we've run out of time and we'll have to let you go, but we thank you for coming in and making our program complete. We deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, my pleasure.
A very special event in Japan that is celebrated by the entire nation will bring together two old friends who happen to represent Seoul and Tokyo. As the Prime Minister's relationship dates back to before they became political heavyweights, we hope they can provide some groundwork to try and improve the two sides' relations. That's all we have for you at this hour. Do join us again same time next week for a brand new episode of The Point. Thank you for watching.